I want to move on and discuss wrestling. I want to discuss IU wrestling, but mainly Penn State and Ohio State. Again, we're probably going to have a guest on in a few days on Thursday, and we'll talk a whole lot more about IU wrestling, which is something that I haven't discussed very much on this show. We haven't actually discussed the team. We've discussed the sport, a while back, maybe a month ago, but we haven't really delved into the team and some of their results. They obviously took on Ohio State yesterday. They lost 45-0. But overall, in the same day or in the same weekend, I watched number 1 Penn State beat number 16 Rutgers 46-0, and I watched number 2 Ohio State beat, I believe, number 23 Indiana 45-0, and it let me know the idea. It made me aware of the idea that the top of wrestling is the top of wrestling. Like the elite college wrestling programs and obviously individual wrestlers are far and away above the rest of the pack, right? There's a clear gap. And it's a little bit misleading because when you rank the top 20, 25, 30, 33 wrestlers, right? When you rank that many, it certainly makes it appear as if a ranked versus ranked matchup is going to be a super fun and interesting one. Number 1 versus number 16, especially number 2 versus number 23 at number 23 is appointment television in football and basketball, things like that. I didn't exactly think this would be appointment television against Ohio State for Indiana, but I certainly thought it would be a whole lot closer than it was, and a lot of that has to do with just my inexperience in wrestling. Obviously, I'm new to this sport. And so I watched number 1 and number 2 compete against other ranked opponents. They shut them out 45-0, 46-0. And I kind of was aware of just how good the top of wrestling is. It was the first time I had sat down and fully watched number 1 Penn State and number 2 Ohio State. I'd seen bits and pieces of Ohio State, kind of got an idea of what they're capable of, but had not fully watched all 10 matches of a duel for Ohio State. And obviously the same can be said for Penn State. So I was alarmed by how much of a gap there seemed to be. I want to go through sort of both of these matchups. Again, Ohio State, Penn State, I don't know how many teams are in that kind of top cut of elite wrestling competitors, elite wrestling contenders for a national championship. I'd have to look at the rankings and kind of, think through it a little bit, but I'm sure Oklahoma State's up there. I'm sure there's more Big Ten schools, the likes of Iowa, Nebraska. I've been super impressed by, watched quite a bit of them throughout the season. And Ohio State and Penn State both looked very, very good. They both looked obviously elite. They looked a cut above the rest. They looked a cut above their competition, namely Indiana and Rutgers. Let's talk about Ohio State and Indiana. Even the ranked wrestlers for Indiana that were taking on unranked wrestlers went down in this contest. Tyler Lillard is the best example. He was number 20 in his weight class, I believe 165. He lost to an unranked Ethan Burden, who probably will be ranked either after this match or very, very soon. He certainly seems capable of it. We'll talk about that match in a second. And again, we're going to talk about this team more on Thursday. We're going to talk about this match a lot more on Thursday. But again, even the ranked wrestlers went down for IU. I mean, the Ohio State program clearly, from a preparation perspective, from a conditioning perspective, from a coaching perspective across the board, and obviously just from a talent perspective, is multiple steps above Indiana and various other programs in college wrestling, especially in the Big Ten. There were 2 matches I want to discuss just briefly. Ethan Burden is my new favorite non-IU wrestler. He's the one, maybe not. I really like Christopher Minto at Nebraska. I'm a big fan of him. But Ethan Burden is someone that I really enjoy watching, and he's my type of wrestler, right? I really appreciate watching him. Burden and Lillard, both lanky, long wrestlers at 165, very strong, right? But again, kind of have those long arms, long legs, those major wingspans, which made this a very interesting matchup to watch. There was not a lot of scoring. These two really offset one another. They had very similar skill sets. It ended, I believe, 2-1 in favor of Ethan Burden. Burden for Ohio State, super smart, super aware of his body and where it is, right? And sort of situational awareness within a match. Very, very strong with Ethan Burden. He ends up winning kind of on a stall call. So they both have their escape in the second and third period. But I believe in the first period is when this happened, where Lillard had already received a stalling warning. So obviously the next time that there's a stall call, it's obviously a point for Burden. And so Burden, the way I interpreted it, Burden worked him to the boundary, right? Which is great, whatever. He works him to the boundary, and it's one of those situations where Burden is driving him out of bounds, and if you're Lillard in that situation, you're obviously trying to avoid a takedown. So you're stepping back, and you're just going to let yourself go out of bounds. It's not going to look like you're letting yourself go out of bounds, so it's not going to be a stall call, but it's just going to be out of bounds. Will reset neutral, and Lillard has a little bit more of an opportunity to potentially find success. But Burden basically, at the boundary, stops, and Lillard's weight and his momentum as he's backpedaling is just falls out of bounds, and it's a stall call, and it's on Lillard, and he was obviously upset about it. But incredibly intelligent play, or incredibly intelligent wrestling, rather, from Burden in situations like that, which was just super fun to watch. And again, obviously their skills really offset one another. Not very much scoring at all. They both got their escapes and their periods on bottom, or the periods in which they started on bottom. Lillard had an opportunity for a late takedown, ran out of time, and Burden wins off of just intelligent wrestling, right? This is 1-1, and we go to sudden victory in most situations. If Lillard has that exact match against many other wrestlers, it's sudden victory, and maybe Lillard wins. He certainly seemed like he had the momentum towards the end, but Burden put it together. Burden got it done, and that was very fun to watch, even though I was obviously cheering for Lillard and cheering for IU in that situation. Ethan Burden is, at the very least, one of my top 2 favorite non-IU wrestlers in the Big Ten. And then a little bit before that, at 157, we saw number 2 Brandon Cannon take on Bryce Lowry in a match that was super encouraging for IU fans. Lowry is unranked, but he's kind of right at the edge. I believe he's number 32 at Flow Wrestling. And obviously, they take the official rankings for the broadcast and for everything. So Lowry was unranked coming into this match, but right there on the edge, like probably 34, 35, probably in the 30s at 157. And he came in against Brandon Cannon, number 2, and had a very even match. Super nice to know for Bryce Lowry. Very encouraging. He obviously would be disappointed with the loss. But again, a super even start. For both of them, it was very hard to keep the other down. Riding time not really a factor because it'd be 20 seconds here and then 20 seconds back the other way. So between Lowry and Cannon, very evenly matched start. And then Lowry sort of began to run out of gas. And they had an unfortunate sequence where he was called for stalling, and then pretty much immediately, right after that point, Cannon obviously rips a takedown, which is just unfortunate. That should be 3 points. It's really 4. If, the official, it's all subjective, right? If the official waits a couple more seconds to call stalling, he wouldn't have had the opportunity to because the takedown would have occurred right then. And so 4 points, unfortunate. He's obviously frustrated, a little bit demoralized. And from there, it was just Cannon racking up points, keeping the pressure on until a major decision victory was ultimately called for Brandon Cannon at the buzzer of the third period. So Lowry kind of ran out of gas against Cannon. I don't know if that's something that happens often for him. I'll have to watch and see and kind of be interested to know what the rest of his matchups look like. I believe now after this result, he's 6-5 on the season. Again, very strong wrestler. He's lost to very strong wrestlers, Cannon being an example at number 2. But Lowry a little bit ran out of gas there, and it'll be interesting to see. By the way, Cannon looked very sharp through all, 7 minutes of that match. So Cannon's great and a national championship contender at this weight class. Lowry certainly showed his potential of being capable of contending with someone like Cannon, the sophomore at number 2 in the country. But again, ran out of gas on the second and third period, and then before you know it, you're down 18-9 or whatever it was, and that obviously results in a major decision victory for Brandon Cannon. Those are the 2 matches that I saw that I kind of wanted to discuss quickly here, and then we'll, again, delve much more into IU wrestling across the board and that matchup against Ohio State, the matchup coming up this weekend against Maryland. I'll be on the call for Big Ten Plus, I believe, with my guy Quincy Bell. And so, yeah, lots to discuss about IU wrestling, but those are kind of the 2 matches that I wanted to touch on. And again, Ohio State, just multiple steps above Indiana, the difference between number 2 and number 23, or wherever Indiana's ranked in the 20s there. Ohio State, championship contending group. They still have unranked wrestlers. Even they won against, the ranked wrestlers that IU employs. And Ohio State looked great. And again, it just clear as day for 2 hours. I watched the wrestlers that I cover and the wrestlers that I often broadcast get dominated by this group that, wrestles at a caliber that we have not yet seen in a duel for IU. It was very interesting, and I'm looking forward to watching Ohio State throughout the rest of the season and kind of getting a feel for what they're capable of as they make a run for a national championship. The one team that probably stands in their way of a national championship is number 1 Penn State. They won against number 16 Rutgers 46-0. They also did it in their own building. Absolute complete domination. PSU seems to be a team that scores, and they try to score points, and it's very rare, apparently, that even against the number 16 team in the country, that Penn State, even if it's evenly matched, right? It's very rare that Penn State exits a first period after the first 3 minutes of wrestling and it's 0-0 or 1-0 or 1-1. Typically, Penn State, maybe it's, 6-4, 6-5, or maybe it's just 10-0 Penn State's leading. It was more often than not the second one. But Penn State is a group that likes to score, and they go after scoring. That seems to be the approach that they take. They're trying to score. They're trying to put points on the board. They're not necessarily trying to, play defensive and kind of just, slow play their opponent. They're going out to score, which means that if you are an opponent of Penn State, you obviously have to take a similar approach, and especially because Penn State probably has the better wrestlers, you've got to take risks. You got to take risks to beat a wrestler above you, and you've got to take risks against a wrestler that is above you and quickly trying to score as much as possible. So you have to take risks. The issue is Penn State is also so great at punishing those risks, and when you take a risk and there's sort of a risk-reward aspect, Penn State's likely to force risk rather than reward to be the result of that play. And that, came up multiple times here in this matchup. So Penn State's very difficult to beat. Again, you have to have comparable competition. You have to have comparable talent, because if you are lower ranked than Penn State and they're wrestlers that are frequently at number one in their weight classes, you got to take risks, and you also just can't do that against those wrestlers. And so there's a certain point where Penn State is just going to run away with a lot of these victories, as they have throughout the season, until they face comparable competition from someone like, say, Ohio State. 165 was my favorite match in this contest. Number one, Mitchell Messenbrink, my first time watching him. He won via fall over Ryan Ford of Rutgers. Fall in the first period, just quick, efficient domination for Messenbrink. Basically, what happened here was it's a Messenbrink takedown, and then they stay on the mat, and Messenbrink dominates on the mat and forces 8 back points, and then obviously secures the fall. So Messenbrink, maybe it was just this one opportunity in this competition. It'll be interesting to watch him throughout the season, but seems to be pretty dominant on the mat, on the ground. Once you get taken down by Messenbrink, you're going to stay there for a long time. He's going to accumulate riding time, effectively make that a 4-point takedown. And then maybe, again, force back points, 8 back points. So twice, right? He put him in a near fall position and obviously was able to rack up points that way. Nearly got a technical fall before even actually securing the fall, which he was able to do in the first period. So quick victory for Messenbrink. Very fun to watch, very entertaining, very scary for anyone that possibly is opposing him throughout the rest of the season. I don't think Indiana actually faces Penn State. They might a little bit later on in the year on the road, but I know they don't play them at home, and I know they don't wrestle them at home, and I know that obviously in the Big Ten, there's not room to play everyone else in the Big Ten. But Indiana, whether it plays Penn State or not, Penn State's going to be a team that absolutely rolls to victory in the vast majority of its dual meets. It does play number 2 Ohio State in the regular season, which will be very fun and interesting as we roll towards the Big Ten meets and the Big Ten duels. But nonetheless, that was fun wrestling to watch. Messenbrink's awesome, Penn State's awesome, and clearly the top of NCAA wrestling is a cut above the rest, and that's something that's probably common knowledge to the folks that follow college wrestling year-round. I don't. I'm new to it. I'm learning it as I go, and that is something that I've learned very recently, is that it's very hard to win in college wrestling against some of those top teams unless you are one of those top teams yourself. Those upsets don't really occur, especially as we get to the NCAA tournament and we kind of have those individual results and those individual champions.